Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Jessica McDonald. I'm a knitting pattern designer and this is my knitting podcast. Today is September 13th. This afternoon I was planning to go out and dig our potatoes, but it's rainy today. The kids are already cranky, so I thought that if I tried to take them outside to the garden, I would have an all-out mutiny, so I'm going to talk about knitting instead. It is nice and fall-like here already. We had our first frost I don't know, 3 or 4 days ago, and the trees, like I'm looking out a window right here behind the camera, and there's a whole bunch of cottonwood trees because the river runs past down there, so I can see down into where the river runs and all the trees, and they're just starting to turn yellow. You know, that first little golden touch of fall is what they're doing right now. So it's really beautiful right now, right there. So I thought, it's raining, they're cranky, I'll just turn on a show and record a knitting podcast instead, because I think everyone would be happier if we did that instead. So I am a knitting pattern designer. I sell knitting patterns. You can find my knitting patterns on Ravelry and my website. Links to both of those places are in the description box below. If you like my designs, I highly recommend that you sign up for my newsletter. It is the best place to be if you want to be alerted to when all my new designs come out. I also send out a regular newsletter packed full of information that can help make your knitting life a lot more enjoyable. A lot of things that I know that I've decided to just share with people because it's hard to find that information. So I put it in my newsletter. I also put it on my blog, which you can find on my website via the link in the description box. If you are new to my channel, in addition to knitting podcasts, I also have a lot of tutorial videos. So if there's a technique that you need some help with, you can look through my tutorials to see if there's one there that can help you. And if you need some help, don't hesitate to send me an email or message me and ask for a tutorial for something, because I'd like to keep making tutorials and I kind of run out of ideas after a while, so it's good if you all suggest some ideas to me. So here we are, September 13th. I don't have any finished objects to show you, but I do have a few whips and a few swatches for future whips. I think what I'll start with is what I am wearing. Oh, also later in the episode, close to the end, I'm going to answer some questions that people submitted to me on Instagram. So that'll be at the end after we talk about the knitting. So first, let's start with the knitting. This is the Snowy Shawl. I'm very cozy today since it's a drizzly day, but this is the Snowy Shawl. It is a top-down, it's a triangular shaped colorwork shawl that is knit in the round and then steeked. You can see the steek covering right here. Here's all the floats on the back side. I don't mind when the floats show at all. I put it on and it just fell like this. If you didn't like it, you could of course fold it over, but I don't think floats are ugly or something that should be hidden. So this is the Snowy Shawl. The pattern is currently available only in my forest print book or ebook. The print book is currently out for pre-order. If you pre-order it, I will send you a bonus ebook so you can cast on right away. And that's the earliest place you can get this pattern. The individual pattern will come out later this fall. And then underneath it is my red cedar sweater, which is also in the forest book, which you can get in the print book pre-order or the ebook. So it is a very cozy outfit, and they're not made to be identical, but they go together really, really well. I think we can agree. They look, even though it's different color work here and here, they still coordinate really nicely. And I think a huge part of that is because I've used the same colors through all these projects. So this gray is the same as this gray, and this dark green is the same as this dark green. So it makes them all go together nicely and coordinate with each other. So that's what I'm wearing. I think we'll just jump into my works in progress. I have two things currently on the needles. The first thing is a hat, which I apparently am in, whoops, lost my yarn, in the middle of a round. Oh my. What am I doing here? I don't usually do this and leave off in the middle of a round, and it's all messed up. There will be a brief intermission while I get to the end of this needle, which is just a few stitches away. It will still be the middle of the round, but at least it will be at the end of a needle. It's color work. Here we go, to the end. So here it is. This is the Lumi Light hat. So last Christmas I designed a really pretty star motif to go onto some hats that I was going to knit for my sisters for Christmas, and then I bought worsted weight yarn, and then I realized that the motif that I came up with did not fit very well on a hat made in worsted weight yarn, and I kind of chopped the chart short so that I could still make, you know, take the main part of the chart and still use it on my worsted weight hat, and that's the Lumi hat. You can find that pattern on Ravelry and my website. But since I did have to like whack off the top of the chart, I always wanted to redo it in a fingering weight yarn, and so that is what I am doing here. So in fingering weight, my gauge is fine enough that I can actually fit the chart onto this hat. Also, I can grade this hat and offer it in multiple sizes. It's a 20 stitch repeat, so at a worsted weight gauge, that means each repeat is 4 inches wide. So it's pretty impossible to offer it in different sizes because I couldn't shorten the chart any further, so I couldn't go down to a 16-inch size and offer like a child size hat because I couldn't chop the motif any shorter, and then to offer a 24-inch size I thought would be too big, and nobody would care to knit a 24-inch size. Although I did recently have an email from somebody who was making her grandson Lumi, and he had a 23¼ inch head circumference, and so I was like, well, maybe I should have written the bigger size and added it too. But I suggested that she just use Aran weight yarn because that would get her about the right 23.5 inch head circumference off of the larger gauge. So that might have been a bit of a ramble. Anyway, this is the Lumi Light hat. I am knitting this in Quince & Co. Finch. This is the color Gingerbread, and then the gray is Iceland. You can see I'm going through a big brown rusty color phase right now. Quince & Co. yarns is something that I use for a long time. Back when I first started knitting, I always bought yarn from like Joann's and Michael's, you know, the big box stores, and I would always buy the acrylic yarns. I would just knit with acrylic from Joann's, and I would look at the wool, you know, it's like the Lyons brand Fisherman's wool, and it's like, it's really harsh, like a scouring pad, like you could clean your pans with this. And I was like, no, I don't want to knit with wool. So I knitted with acrylic for a really long time, and then I found Madeline Tosh yarns, and oh, they were gorgeous, so beautiful. And I knit with Madeline Tosh yarns, and that was my first foray into knitting with wool, was the non-superwash hand-dyed Madeline Tosh yarns. And I knit almost exclusively with Madeline Tosh yarns for a couple of years, and then I kind of tried some other brands of superwash yarns, and I made my daughters a lot of stuff in superwash yarn, and I wasn't really satisfied with how it turned out. Well, when it's first done, it looks good, but as you wear it, superwash yarn does not hold up well. And so I wanted to try non-superwash yarn, and the very first non-superwash yarn I ever knit with was Quince & Co. Lark. And it was so soft and looked so nice and held up so well So I knit a lot of stuff with Quince & Co. in the period after that, and now I've moved on to more varied yarn usage, I should say. But Quince & Co. was my very first foray into actual non-superwash wool yarns, and I still love them. They're always, the colors are beautiful. I'm always so pleased with how the item turns out. It holds up well, it looks nice for a really long time. I just like Quince & Co. yarns. So anyway, this is Quince & Co. Finch. There's a little mini ad for you, but I just really like their yarn. Here's the beginning of it. You can see there's a little half star here, and then we're moving up and there's going to be another big star here, and there's going to be a lot of snowflake stuff going on at the top, sprinkles of snow and whatnot. Since this is fingering weight yarn, this brim, this folded brim, took me forever. So it's 5 inches of ribbing on size 1 needle, fingering weight yarn. Oops, it doesn't want to fold for me. When I first cast on this hat, my plan was to release it about now. And I was like, I need to knit this hat in a week. And then I was really stressed out because, you know, I'm knitting 5 inches of ribbing on size 1 needles. I was like, this is taking forever. I was like, why on earth am I killing myself over this deadline that is entirely self-imposed? I can just enjoy the process and enjoy knitting this hat and take my time with it and then just release it when it's done, because I was really stressing myself out about it. So once I stopped stressing about it, then I enjoyed it quite a bit. So here it is. It's got a folded brim, which you might be looking at it and thinking, oh, that's ridiculous to knit 5 inches of ribbing on size 1 needles. But at the end of the day, it's well worth it. A brim can really make or break a hat, in my opinion. It's kind of like the neckline on a sweater. Like, you don't want to, like, half behind it. Oh, it's a little bit tight. I have a big head. But it's well worth it in the end. What's going on here? You can see my face is really long and narrow, so I don't like things that are just like accentuate the length and narrowness of my face. So to have a little extra bulk around my face from the folded brim, I think is a lot more flattering. And I also think it just looks a lot cozier with the folded brim. And I like a good depth of a folded brim. So this will be about 2.5 inches. When it's stretched, when you stretch it out, it shrinks a little bit lengthwise. So when I'm wearing it, it will probably be more like 2.25 inches deep. But like the folded brim is just, it's just the right way to go when it comes to a hat, in my opinion. Even though it may take a million years to knit the ribbing, I think that a folded brim is the right choice pretty much all of the time for a hat. I just think it looks better. I do, I just think it does. If you disagree with me, you are free to just knit, you know, half this length and have a single brim, or just knit a little tiny brim. That's very easy to change a brim. That's a really easy modification to make, but personally, I think a folded brim is very important for a hat. So there's Lumi Light, and what? On the 14th row of a 62 row chart, so it will take me a little while before I finish this one. So I'll get my money's worth out of this one. My knitting time's worth of that one. So there's my first work in progress. And now I have a shawl to show you. So Jill, oh, I forget her last name. Hold on a minute. North Bay Fiber. Jill Zielinski of Knitterella started a yarn company right about a year ago. They just had their 1-year anniversary. Oh, where's this? There it is. They just had their 1-year anniversary, so that's an easy way for me to remember. She started this yarn company with yarn from sheep that were local to her. And of course I love, you know, American made yarn and a new woman owned yarn company. I just had to get some. So I got 5 skeins. North Bay Fiber Heritage. It's not going to focus on it, is it? Nope. I'm sitting too far away to reach the screen to actually focus it myself. So this is North Bay Fiber 100% Targhee Polypay wool, which is a kind of fiber I had never ever knit with before. So I was just irresistible. American made yarn from a woman-owned company, a sheep whose fiber I had never worked with before, and it's Woollentwine. Like, Woollentwine is my favorite. So I just had to get it. So I got 5 skeins of the natural color. She didn't have very many colors that were available when I went shopping because they all sold out pretty much instantly. So I got 5 skeins of the natural, which I was pretty pleased with because I have been wanting to make a nice, cozy, neutrally colored shawl for a while. I finally have this shawl. Oh, I've been needing shawls. It gets really cold here, and when it's really cold outside, I feel the cold really intensely, even though I am inside with the heater on, and I just want to add another layer on top. So I just want more. So I think shawls would be the answer. So I wanted to get enough yarn I could make a nice big cozy shawl out of. I really had no idea how much yarn I would need, so I popped onto Ravelry, browsed through the DK weight shawls, looked for a good decent sized one, and just looked at their yardage estimates and based my purchase off of that. So I got 5 skeins of the yarn, and here is the beginning of the shawl. It doesn't look like anything at all right now. It's kind of bunched up on the needles, and yeah. So it starts here with a garter tab cast on. It's a triangular shape, but it has the same modification that I did with the Snowy Shawl, where you increase every single row on the wingspan and only every other row on the center spine, so that your wingspan grows faster than your depth, so that you end up with a shawl that is nice and long, but not way too deep. Right now I'm just knitting in garter stitch. That's literally it. Garter stitch plus 1, oops, can't see it really, 1 stitch in the middle, right here, slip stitch down the center to define the center spine. I like it when the center spine is defined in a very simple way. I like it defined, but not too much, just something really simple. Like I did that same thing here on the Snowy Shawl, just a slip stitch down the center. It's really understated and simple, but it just gives you that nice line of this is the middle. Anyway, I was fond of that, so I did it again. So it's just garter stitch. And this fabric is so squishy and just, it's amazing. Since this is a woolen spun yarn, it is really, really good for garter stitch, in my opinion, when you have a woolen spun yarn, because it's just so squishy and puffy and it plumps up, and it's just perfect for that. So this is making a really nice garter stitch fabric, which I'm really loving. I'm 2 skeins in now. I cast on a day when I really needed something very simple to knit, and I just desperately needed it. We were having family visiting, and I needed something to knit. I didn't have anything to knit, and I just grabbed this and cast it on because I knew I was going to start with really simple garter stitch, and I decided I'll knit the garter stitch for 2 skeins. So this is the second skein. As you can see, I've now reached my 2 skeins, and then I'll do some patterning, but I have no idea what I'm going to do. I want to do some really simple, like, textured lace, and maybe I'll add some baubles. Baubles would work really nice. Baubles will look really good in this yarn. They would be really puffy and squishy. But yeah, so I've got to come up with what patterning I'm going to do at this point now. So it's this big, which it's bunched up on the needles. So maybe I'll knit a little bit further before I start the patterning. But, so I've got to figure out what I'm going to do now. I've not swatched for this. I've not charted anything for the design it will ultimately become. I just really desperately needed something to knit. So I grabbed my size 6 needles, which is what I like to knit DK weight yarns on, and started knitting. Because like it's very simple. You just increase and knit, garter, stitch. And so it's like I just wrote down a few notes for what I'm doing and just knit. I can just knit because like you can't go without knitting, right? It's just horrifying. So I'm at the point now where I really need to figure out where I'm going to go from here. So this is going to sit in, take a little break from this because I don't want to knit too far and then want to rip back. So I think I'll just leave it right here for now and work on what I'm going to do next. Because I have no idea what I'm going to do next. I have a very, very little of a plan, just a vague idea, and so yeah. Anyway, so that's my shawl that I'm currently knitting. Next up, I'm going to show you the swatches for my upcoming sweater. So first, this is a very boring basic swatch, but you can see it's a good size, right? Make your swatches nice and big. This is 6 by 6.5, 7-ish inches. This is Barrett Wool Co. Woolens in the color Thimble. I think it's the color Thimble. It is the color Thimble. And it's gray, it's a heathered gray, so it's not a solid gray. You can kind of see the heatheredness in it. Like I said, it's not going to focus on what I hold out. So it's a nice heathered gray color. It is rustic. I don't think it's going to be irritating to me when I wear it. This is blocked now, so it was a lot crunchier before I blocked it, and now that I've blocked it, it's softened up nicely. And you can see that it's got a decent amount of drape in it. It's not like a stiff, hard yarn, but it is a nice woolly one. My neck is my most sensitive part. It doesn't feel baby soft, but it's not going to bother me. It's not going to bother me in a sweater when I'm wearing it. Yeah, it doesn't feel like it's going to irritate me. But anyway, this is going to become an adult version of Fletching. Fletching is one of my children's sweaters that I made 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years ago now. And I have received a lot of requests for an adult size version of that one. So I'm finally doing the adult size version of that one. And this gauge swatch is just so I could check and make sure I had the same gauge I had back then. Check my gauge. So I'm going to knit it in these two colors. This is Barrett Wool Co. Woolens is the same yarn I knit the original Fletching in. So I'm using the exact same yarn for my version, except I am using this color, which is old-fashioned. So it's kind of a, how would I describe this? It's showing up a little bit darker on screen than it is in real life. It is a rich golden, well, it's got a bit of a little gold in it. It's also a bit coppery, a bit yellowy, a bit rusty. From the screen as you're seeing it now, or as I am seeing it in my screen, it is a bit lighter in color and I think a tiny bit more golden as compared to what it looks like in my camera, which I'm assuming is going to look the same on your screen. So it does look a bit darker on screen than it does in real life. But it's still a really nice color. As you can see, I'm really embracing the autumnal hues, the rusty browns and golds and all that. I've got some here, got some here. So this will be my colors. I am most of the way through grading this pattern, but I have a little more work to do and then I can cast on. This one is going to be really simple color work and have just plain stockinette in the round for the body and the sleeves. So I'm really eager to get this pattern done and this sweater cast on because we're taking a trip to Yellowstone in a little while, later this fall, and I don't have a good thing to knit in the car. It's about 4 hours from us here where we live, and so I need something to knit on in the car while we're driving there and then while we're driving between places, and I want something really simple to knit while we're there because I'm hoping we'll have at least a little bit of downtime to just sit somewhere and enjoy the scenery and relax a little bit. So this whip is totally unsuited for car knitting. It's a 20 stitch color work chart that I have to constantly refer to the chart as I'm working around. So I just want something where I don't have to have a pattern, I don't have to have the chart handy, I don't have to look at anything, I can just knit. And if it's just stockinette, I can just knit. I don't need to look at my knitting while I knit stockinette. I can also knit ribbing without looking now. So that's a pretty cool skill to have. I gained that this summer. But I just want something really simple that I can knit on without having to look at it. I can knit on it in the dark, I can knit on it in the car, I can knit on it anywhere and everywhere. And this will be the perfect thing. So that's why this sweater is next, because I'm not just a designer with a design schedule and, you know, making things just to sell a pattern. I'm also a very passionate knitter and I knit all of the time. And yeah, I cannot go on a trip without knitting. That would be awful. So this sweater is coming next. And I need to hurry up and get the pattern done so that I can cast it on because I was hoping to get through the yoke before we leave. So that's next. Then my very next swatch, the sweater after that, and I do also plan to make my husband a sweater as he keeps constantly reminding me. But this one here, this is not everything that's going to go on in this sweater. I decided not to swatch the entire thing just because I'm not going to change it. When I first started designing, I would make my chart and fuss over it, and then I would knit my swatch and I would knit a different swatch and change it a little bit and knit a different swatch. I'd knit a million swatches for a single sweater and I'd change my needle size and I'd, you know, swap things out and change them. But now that I am as experienced as I am now, I don't always swatch the entire yoke or the entire motif. Like, I didn't swatch for this shawl at all. This is Durham Nature Gilliatt, which is a worsted weight yarn that I knit on size 7 needles. I already had the gauge that I was going to knit this on because I had used it multiple times. So I did not swatch any of these motifs. I just charted them and then knit them. I did, however, have to rip back because I was originally not making it big enough, but I don't always have to chart everything or swatch everything. This, I also didn't chart or didn't swatch this all out. I knew what gauge I was gonna get and I liked it well enough in the chart that I knew it was gonna look good, and so yeah. If you are a new designer, I highly recommend swatching the entire motif and everything out. Just swatch everything, but I've gotten to the point where I can look at the chart printed out and I kind of know already this isn't going to work and I'll go change it, or this is fantastic, it's going to look great. We're just going to start now. Yeah, if you are a newer designer, make sure you swatch, but when you get to the same point as I am, you probably won't have to swatch everything all of the time. So this is not everything that's going to go on in this sweater, but it's part of it. This is in an unspun yarn. This is the very first time I'm knitting with unspun yarn. It is having a very big moment in the knitting community. It's like mohair a couple of years ago, but this is unspun yarn, and this is going to become a sweater. So this is yarn from Wool Dreamers. They are a Spanish company, and they make this unspun yarn from the Manchega breed of sheep. It's a sheep that's used for their cheese in Spain, and this yarn is called Manchelopi. It is an unspun yarn. These are the natural colors of the fiber. These are not the only colors that are available. There's more colors available, but I got these ones because I thought they would work really well together in color work, and lo and behold, they do. So this is my first foray into knitting with unspun yarn, and I had a lot of fun. It's entirely new. It's an entirely new experience because it is unspun. So the way this cake is wound, it has, let me unwind a little bit. It has 2 strands already. See, the 2 strands already are just side by side. And I'm knitting with the 2 strands, which according to the advice on the internet says it's about a DK weight. So I swatched on size 6 needles, and I haven't measured yet, but I am kind of thinking it looks, I haven't actually measured it yet, so take this with a heaping pile of salt, but it looks to me like it might be more of a worsted weight gauge versus a DK weight gauge. But I'm wondering if perhaps I'm knitting it looser than they assume people will knit it, but like, I don't want to pull it tight because then your yarn breaks. So I need to measure this swatch, basically, is what it comes down to. I'm an excellent podcaster and made sure not to do this beforehand. Let's see. Let's just do a rough measurement. Can I even count? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5.5-ish. So about 5 stitches an inch is what I usually knit worsted weight yarn on. So my guess was correct. This does look like more of a worsted weight gauge versus a DK weight gauge. So 5 stitches an inch is about my usual worsted weight gauge. And this one, I just measured 1 inch, which is not a good way to measure your gauge. You should measure over 4 inches and measure in multiple places. But I just quickly measured over 1 inch, and it was about 5.5-ish stitches per inch. So looks like it's about a worsted weight equivalent at the gauge I'm knitting it at. Which I would really like to write this sweater on a gauge that is really easily substituted with a yarn that is not this yarn, which just because it makes the sweater more accessible to more people. Like, not everybody's going to want to knit with unspun yarn. Some people may just want to knit with a normal yarn and knit the sweater with a normal yarn. So I want to make sure that people who want to knit this pattern but don't want to knit with an unspun yarn can still make this pattern. So I'll wind this back up. The very first thing I did when I sat down to do my swatch, which was the very first time I ever knit with unspun yarn, the very first thing I did was break a big chunk off, and I thought, oh, alrighty then. But it's okay, I didn't die. Anyway, I broke it many times. Like, you can see, actually I started down here, because there's quite a few little random ends here and there. My camera shut off and I was just sitting here talking away to nobody for a little while. Anyway, I was showing off that I broke the yarn many times as I was knitting this swatch. Like, here's a little end from where I broke it. Oh, I broke it right after I finished my cast on. I pulled too hard as I was going to knit my very first stitch and broke that. And then here's another spot where I broke it. It took me quite a bit of practice to get to the point where I wasn't pulling the stitches too hard and just pulling the yarn way too thin, or just breaking it outright as I was knitting along. So if you do knit with unspun yarn, I highly recommend you knit a nice big practice swatch. It is a really nice woolly yarn, so I'm not worried about, like, if this was in a sweater, I don't think I would need to worry about this right here, like loosening up or popping out. I think it would stay there forever because it's just so nice and woolly and grippy. Even through locking and manipulating it a bit, like there's this big loose piece on the back, but on the front it looks perfectly normal and okay. It's not like slipping through and loosening up in the front. It's just gonna stick out in the back for a while. So I really don't think you need to get overly worried if you do break it. Just add a new, just reattach and keep going. You can see I steeked this, and all along the edge where I steeked, it's not unraveling, it's not coming undone, it's just sitting there because it's so nice and woolly that it holds on to itself. So here's a bit of an explanation. When I knit my swatches for things in the round, particularly color work, I just knit a little tube. So it was just a little tube. I use the magic loop method, and I just knit a little tube. And then when I'm done, so this is a 20 stitch wide repeat that I am swatching. So I just cast it on 40 stitches, which usually when I swatch, I start with 40 stitches. It's kind of like my go-to number. But anyway, so I swatched in the round, magic loop, and if you want to learn how to knit the magic loop, I have a tutorial down in the description box below. But yeah, I knit it in the round, and then I stick it, and then I have this. So the reason I do that is because the typical way of swatching in the round is you knit across and then you shove it around to the other end of the needle and you leave a long strand across the back. The edge stitches, for quite a while, maybe like 3 or 4 stitches, are all going to be really loose and wonky. They're not being held by a stitch next to it, it's just a loose strand of yarn. They're just kind of falling apart at the edge. There's nothing holding them. So if you knit a swatch that's, you know, exactly your 4 inches, and you've knit it in that style where you've got the long strands across the back and then you cut them and you lay it flat, your gauge is going to be off because those edge stitches are wonky. They're just never going to be accurate. And so when you knit in the round, actually knit in the round, everything's held snug by the knitting next to it, so you don't have any loose and wonky edge stitches. And it also uses a little less yarn because you're not running those big long strands behind, which they always seem kind of wasteful to me. If you're knitting in that fashion and cutting those strands, you're not going to be able to knit with that yarn again. Just like if you knit a swatch and stick it. I'm not going to be able to salvage the yarn from this swatch and re-knit with it because the pieces are going to be way too short. But anyway, I knit a in the round magic loop style, then I steek it, and that's how I do my swatches. I didn't add any edge stitches. I had 1 selvage stitch up each side that I cut, not up the middle of. I cut half a stitch to the side of, which was my mistake, entirely my mistake. Sometimes, usually, I'll put in a few little steek stitches. I never reinforce it because this is not going to have any wear. It's going to lay on my desk, I'm going to measure it, and then it's going to go in my swatch pile that just sits in this closet back here and is only brought out if I need pictures of swatches. So there's never going to be any wear. I'm never going to have to worry about this unravels. If it starts to unravel, it's not a big deal because I don't actually need this beyond measuring my stitches per inch. So that's how I do my swatches in the round. This is going to become a sweater. It's going to be so warm. This fabric is actually quite thick and fluffy. It's really light and thick and fluffy, and it's gonna be amazing. I knit it this way. Actually, this is kind of funny. I started knitting this late at night when I was really tired, and I started reading my chart from the top down instead of the bottom up. I didn't realize it until I was a few rows in. I was like, oh, for Pete's sake. I just kept going reading it from the top down. But if you are going to knit colorwork or read a chart, make sure you read your chart from the bottom up, not from the top down. And then I steeped it half a stitch off, but it didn't really matter. I was like, maybe I should swatch in the morning. But anyway, so this is gonna become a sweater. It's gonna be super cozy. I'm gonna love it immensely. The only problem is that I can't decide how long I want to make it. So it's gonna be a top-down sweater. And usually if I'm going to wear a sweater with my jeans, I'll knit it to a mid-hip length so that it falls nicely with my jeans. I have a very long torso, and I grew up in the 90s and early 2000s, the time when it was super low jeans and a little bit short tops and everybody saw your bellies. So I was never able to find shirts that were long enough in that day and age. So I have a little bit of lingering trauma from that. So I never, ever, ever knit my stuff short because it's just the problem, okay? You can't ever find shirts long enough. So I'm kind of wondering if I want to knit this one to a cropped length because I've started wearing a lot of dresses and I don't have a ton of sweaters to wear with my dresses. I have some cardigans, but they're all mid-hip length shawl collar cardigans, kind of the same style. And I'd like something a little bit different. And I really, really like how it looks when you wear a cropped sweater with a dress, like a waist or high hip length with a dress. I think it looks really, really nice. But like a long mid-hip length sweater with a dress is not as nice looking. It looks a little nicer when the sweater is shorter. So I'm kind of wondering, since I don't have a lot of sweaters that I can wear with my dresses, I'm kind of wondering if I want to crop this one and knit it not quite natural waist length, a little bit below, maybe like halfway between high hip and natural waist. I think that would be a nice place for it to fall. I don't wear high-waisted jeans, so it would not be able to be worn with high-waisted jeans. It would only be able to be worn with dresses or if I had a high-waisted skirt, which I don't have high-waisted skirts, but I would kind of like some. So I'm wondering if maybe I want to knit this one a little bit short so that I can wear it over my dresses because I don't have a lot of sweaters to wear with my dresses. I always wear a dress to church, like always, or a skirt. So I do actually have a need for that in my wardrobe. And I was thinking that later this winter I would knit myself a few, I have ideas for a few, like some cardigans that are kind of short, you know, right under the natural waist, and a couple pullovers. But I'm wondering if perhaps I should just add this one to it because I was originally planning to make it mid-hip length and I can wear it with my jeans and I can wear it to go skiing and all that stuff, but I already have nice cozy sweaters that I can wear with my jeans and that I can wear to go skiing. So it might be better for my wardrobe if I knit this one shorter so that I can wear it with my dresses, and then I can, you know, wear my not perfect linen dress and this sweater and some wool leggings and my boots, and I'd be super cozy. I'm talking myself into it on camera as I go. I guess we'll all have to wait and see, and we'll find out together when I get decent way into the body of this sweater and decide how long to finally make it. Because I don't have to decide right this minute how long I'm going to make it. It's a top-down sweater. So I only have to decide when I get to the length where I would need to start the ribbing if I was going to crop it. So I have a while before I have to make up my mind. So I think I'll just wait. until then. What do you think? Do you think I should crop it or do you think I should leave it long? What do you think? You can tell me. You can tell me. I am eagerly awaiting your advice because I cannot decide and I cannot make up my mind. So there it goes into a basket, because when I was knitting on it, I had the plates sitting on my bed and just gently pulling from them. And so it's like, I'm not going to stuff them into a knitting bag because I don't know what horrible things would happen to them. So I'll keep them in a basket instead. Oh, here's another thing I said while I was prattling on and my camera wasn't recording. If you want to learn more about knitting with unspun yarn, Woollentwine, she's a fellow podcaster. She is a yarn producer and dyer. She has a whole video dedicated to talking about how to knit with unspun yarn. I'm going to put a link to that video in the description box below. If you are interested in unspun yarn or just curious about it or you really want to try it, definitely go watch her video. I loved it. It was fantastic and it helped me out a ton. So go watch her video on how to knit with unspun yarn, which, yeah, I really needed it. So at this point now, that's all of my knitting. So now I'm going to answer the questions that I got on Instagram a few days ago. The first question is 3-color colorwork tension tricks and tips. I'm not going to tell you the answer to that right now in this video because I have a tutorial video that answers all of those questions. So if you want to knit with 3 colors at once, which there are a few rows in the Snowy Shawl and a few of my other designs that use 3 colors in one row, go to my tutorial section down below, go to my knitting with 3 colors video, because I talk at length about how to manage your yarns, how to set them out so that you don't tangle your strands all together and turn it into a mess, and how to manage your tension and how to manage your color dominance, and all of that is in my tutorial video, so you should go watch that. Also, I demonstrate how to do it whilst I'm knitting in 3 colors, because I don't think that's something that I could explain very well without actually showing you. So 3-color colorwork tension tricks and tips, go to my knitting with 3 colors tutorial video. I will put a link in the description box. That is the one you need. It will teach you all about how I do it. The next one is color dominance in color work and what that even means. Oops. So color dominance basically is one of your colors, one of the stitches is going to sit a little bit in front of the other stitch. So they're not sitting perfectly side by side like this. One is just a little bit in front. And so the one that's sitting a little bit in front is going to show up more boldly in your color work. So when I'm knitting color work, I have made this into a giant tangle. I hold my contrast color always in my left hand. I hold my main color always in my right hand. That is because, I don't know if you'll be able to see it on here because it's really fine. That is because the way this stacks the floats in the back means that one is a little bit on top of the other one. So my main color floats are sitting a little bit on top of, like on top of up here, on top of the contrast color floats. And so that pushes the contrast color a little bit forward. And so that is the color that is dominant. It shows up a little bit brighter. There is shrieking downstairs. I assure you nobody is dying. It's just children. So one color sits a little bit in front of the other color. If you're knitting with 2 hands like I do, always hold your contrast. Always hold your contrast color in your left hand and always hold your main color in your right hand. And you can, if you want a really good demonstration of how I knit color work, my how to knit color work tutorial video, like I'm doing it on the screen. You can't see my face, you just see my hands working. That is a good video for you to watch as well. So essentially what that means on the right side of the fabric is my gray stitches stand a little bit in front of my gingerbread color stitches. And so my gray stitches stand out a little bit more. That just means your motif, your color work is going to pop a little more if you make sure you hold your contrast color in the dominant position. If you are halfway through a color work project and you realize that you're holding them the wrong way, you're holding your contrast color in your right hand and your main color in your left, so your main color is dominant, don't change it. The main thing with color dominance is to make sure you hold your yarns in the same hand and maintain the same color dominance through the entire project. If you change your color dominance halfway through the project, you're going to end up with a line through your motif, and there's going to be a defined difference between one side and the other. So, long story short, make sure you always hold the yarn the same. I think I'm going to work up a swatch showing color dominance so you can see very easily the difference, and a whole blog post on color dominance here in a little while. Not right this minute, probably be in October before I get to it. But I think that it would be a lot easier to demonstrate it if I actually had a swatch where I swapped color dominance halfway through, and then you can see what's happening and I can explain it more thoroughly. But color dominance basically means one color sits a little bit in front of the other and is going to show up more boldly on the right side of your work. And always make sure that you hold your yarns in the same hand or the same position throughout the entire project so that your color dominance does not change halfway through your yoke. The next one is how to avoid yarn breaking when doing color work with Manchelopi. I will update you on this one, and I have knit more color work in Manchelopi. Although Woollentwine's video that I told you about a little bit ago, that would probably give you a lot of really helpful tips. Favorite patterns you've made that aren't yours and upcoming designs. Well, I haven't knit a pattern that's not mine in a very, very long time. I think the last one I made that wasn't mine, I think it's called Still Water by Marie Green. It's a cardigan with a faux cable panel. I knit that, I think I was pregnant with Aiden, so he's almost 3, so it'll be about 3 years ago. That's also the sweater that made me decide to never again knit with Brooklyn Tweed Shelter, because the sweater, which would only be 3 years old now, instantly started falling apart and breaking. I had giant holes everywhere just because the yarn was so fragile that it kept breaking as I was wearing it. I was like, I'm not going to put so much work and effort into a sweater that instantly falls apart ever again. So, sorry, Brooklyn Tweed, but your yarn fell apart. I think that's the last pattern that I made that was not mine. I really liked that pattern. I wore that sweater a lot. It was in a nice dark green color, which I've always wanted a dark green cardigan ever since that one died. So that's the last one I've made. And even before then, when I first started knitting, I knit a lot of patterns, and then after Talia was born, I started just making up a ton of stuff for her, and most of my knitting time was knitting for my girls, my kids. And a lot of those things were things I just made up, which I can't show them to you now. They were knit in superwash yarn. They ended up disgusting and falling apart and stretched out, and just the yarn would bleed, and they just never looked nice after being worn, so I threw them all away. So yeah, I started knitting my own designs, my own things I came up with pretty early on into my knitting journey. And I knit a lot of things that I kind of designed myself. I made up myself that like never saw the light of the internet and will never be shared with you ever. So I was designing before I was designing as a, job. So I don't know that I have any, like, there are some designs that I admire, that I see, like I love to watch other designers and see the beautiful things they come up with. And if I wasn't a designer myself, there are some things that I would choose to knit. But like, I don't have time to knit other people's patterns because I am constantly knitting my own. So, sorry. Knitting swatches, what is important, and so on. First of all, I have a whole blog post on knitting swatches that I will put a link to in the description box below. It goes into great depth about swatches. First of all, when you're knitting swatches, what is very important is size. At least 5 inches square, but I prefer to knit 6 inches square. This one is like 6 by 7. This one is, I haven't even measured it, total size. This one is 8 inches wide by 6 inches tall. So make sure you knit a nice big swatch. A nice big swatch. Start with the recommended needle size in the pattern, and then if you don't get gauge, you can adjust up and down. You may not get the same gauge on the same yarn, on the same needles as the designer did, so don't worry if your first gauge swatch doesn't match the gauge in the pattern. Just change your needle size, or change, like if you knit with a wooden needle versus a metal needle, your gauge is going to be different. Basically, my best advice about gauge swatches is do not rush this process. The gauge swatch will determine whether or not you actually have a sweater that fits you in the end. Don't rush it. So make sure you swatch a nice big swatch, nice big swatch. When you measure in multiple areas. So I'll measure up here, I'll measure down here, I'll measure down here, across 4 inches or 10 centimeters, and then average the measurements that you've gotten, or use the most common one. So up here I might get, 18 stitches over 4 inches, but down here it'll be 19 stitches over 4 inches. And then over here it's 18 stitches over 4 inches again. So I would use 18 stitches over 4 inches. And there is going to be a little bit of variation even inside the swatch. Like, knitting is not like, you're not a machine. It's going to be a little bit, there's going to be some variance. So measure in multiple places, take the average or the most common measurement. Do that also when you're measuring your row gauge. Make sure it's nice and big. Don't knit a border. Don't knit a garter stitch border along the vertical edge, because garter stitch has a row gauge that is shorter than stockinette stitch. So it's going to act like a little bit of elastic, like if you had an elasticated waistband, it's going to pull this in. It's going to pull it shorter. It's going to pull together over here, and that is going to distort all of the stitches along the edge. And it's not just going to be the ones right on the very, very edge. It's going to have an effect into the swatch a little ways. So you want to make sure to just have it flat. Do not knit a garter stitch edge. Like if you really, really desperately wanted to knit an edge, I suppose if you did a few stitches of ribbing and had a column of ribbing, that wouldn't be bad, but make sure you don't measure in the ribbing. But don't knit a garter stitch border. If you wanted to do top and bottom, that would be fine. That wouldn't distort that wouldn't pull your fabric anywhere, because with garter stitch, it's just as wide as stockinette. It's just shorter than stockinette. So don't knit a garter stitch edge. Knit it nice and big, 6 by 6. Measure in multiple places. Take the average or the most common measurement. Don't be afraid of swatching multiple times. Just swatch like crazy. I'm the designer, so I don't have to meet a certain gauge in a pattern, so I can just swatch one time and then take my gauge from this and then write the pattern for this gauge. But I'm sorry, you might have to swatch a few times to get the same gauge as I do. We're all individuals, and the way we hold yarn and the way we knit is different. So everyone has some variance in their gauge just because we're different people and we hold the yarn different ways. So nice big swatch, no garter stitch border, measure in multiple places. Don't be afraid to make multiple swatches. And I'll put a link to my blog post on gauge and swatching down in the description box below so you can read that. Beginning to knit socks, how to start. I would also like to know that. I have never knit myself a pair of socks. I plan to because I really want to have some hand knit socks. I have made my husband a pair of socks, and I made Aiden some socks when he was a baby, but that is the sum total of socks that I have made. So I do not have a good answer for this question. I am sorry. I think her name is Julianne Knitter. Hang on. Hold on. There is somebody I kind of know who might be able to help you with this. I think I subscribe to a podcast. Hang on. Maybe I don't. Twin Stitches Designs. Twin Stitches Designs. She knits a lot of socks. And I think she has some good like tips for sock knitting or beginning sock knitters. I'm trying to see if she has a specific video. Like if you're new to knitting socks, watch this one. But goodness sakes, should have brought a notebook so I could write things down. I will put I'll just write it on my pattern. I will put a link to her channel down below because she does knit a lot of socks. And I think, oh, that's a highlighter. I think she would be helpful to you if you want to learn how to knit socks. So Woollentwine, Twin Stitches Designs, oh, the gauge one. I hope I didn't forget anything. Okay, back to Instagram here. Why won't you finish my projects? This is my sister. She's knitting Riverlands right now. She just joined the shoulders. You're doing fine, Janelle. Just keep going. Okay, this is Beth. Swatches for knitting in the round. Often my sweaters turn out too small in the round. There seems to be up to a 10% difference, but I know people who knit bigger in the round. This one is a puzzle because generally when you go from knitting a small circumference to knitting a big circumference, your gauge gets looser, but Beth's gauge gets tighter. I am puzzled by this, completely puzzled by this. I do not have a good answer. But if you, we'll crowdsource an answer here. If you have an idea for what's going on here and how she can fix it, please do comment down below and let us know. So she's knitting looser in her swatches than she is in her sweater and wants to know how to fix it. Like, I don't know, because usually when you knit a small circumference in the round, like a sleeve, you would knit that tighter than the bigger circumferences, but she has the opposite problem. And it's hard to say, okay, well, this is my swatch, I'm going to add 10% because I know I'm going to knit it tighter in the sweater. That's a really impossible thing to do. I don't know. I'm sorry, Beth, I don't know. But if you have an idea for what is going on here, please comment and let us know, because I would really like to figure that one out. So those were all of my questions. Oh, the 3-color color work. Tutorial. I think that's all of them, right? This, yeah, gauge and swatching. I think that's all of them. Thank you so much for giving me questions. I will probably do that next time that I podcast as well. But that is the end of today's podcast. I'm going to go respond to emails and yeah. I hope you all have a lovely day or lovely rest of your day. Thank you for coming and hanging out with me. Please do subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment down below so that more people can see my content and see the videos that I make. And until next time, happy knitting. Bye.